Kate Messner, the author of Fergus and Zeke. Gosh, I was one of these kids who, I was the youngest of four. And so even before I had any clue how to read books or make letters, I saw my older brothers and sisters doing homework, with their pencils. And I would sit with a pencil and pretend to be doing homework. So somebody would call me for dinner and I would say, I'm sorry, I have to finish this essay. I was like 3. So I always pretended to write even before I could write. My first memory of actually, writing a book that I was really proud of came when I was about 7. And I'd been gorging on shark books all summer long at the library and decided that I had to write my own shark book. So I called it Shark, Terror of the Sea. It was a page long. It listed all my favorite shark facts. And I made a cover for it. My mom put it on the fridge. So that was my first sort of published book, I guess. For about a month after that, anytime my mom and dad had company for dinner, I would just wait for the doorbell to ring and stalk the dinner guests. And then I would run to the door and say, hey, welcome to our house. May I take your coat? No, please come to the refrigerator and read my book right now. So. With Fergus and Zeke, I love the exploration that takes place. That's how I always feel when I go to a museum, and especially a natural history museum. It feels like the whole world is there. And I feel like I've always been a fan of field trips. As a kid, it was always my favorite day of school if I knew we were going on a field trip. And I was a middle school English teacher for 15 years, and field trip days were still my favorite days then, even though there was a lot to keep track of, because it's always this different sense of adventure. It's a school adventure. It's an exploration. You're leaving the classroom behind. And so I worked really hard in Fergus and Zeke to capture that sense of adventure and that sense of exploration. That's probably what I'm proudest of. I think the perfect reader for Fergus and Zeke is a kid who's longing to explore, who wants to climb those dinosaur bones, even though we know we can't really touch things at museums. I was always that kid who really wanted to touch the dinosaur skeleton, or I really wanted to pet the lion in the diorama. And so I feel like this book provides a sense of that for kids, even who know they shouldn't touch the displays, but who love that kind of exploration and adventure. In life or in writing? Or both? The best advice I've ever been given, probably in both, happened when I was actually in my first career out of college, which is in broadcast journalism. I had just taken an internship at a television station, a newsroom in Syracuse, New York. And there was a really sort of mean, surly anchorman that reviewed all the scripts that I wrote for him. And one day I put a script in front of him, and he shook his head and he crumpled it up and threw it away. And he kept doing that. And finally I said, you're going to have to write all your own stuff if you don't tell me what's wrong here. And he said, well, do you want to learn? I said, yes, I do. Help. And so he sat down and he said, well, tell me why you wrote this way. It sounds very formal and very awkward and very not like you. And the truth was I had written this particular story in a way that I thought sounded like this reporter at another station in town. And I admired her so much. Her name was Cheryl Nathans. And she was an investigative reporter, and she was everything I wanted to be when I entered the world of journalism. And so I said, I thought I sounded like Cheryl Nathans. And he said, that's your first mistake. The job of being Cheryl Nathans is taken by Cheryl Nathans. And you're going to have to find your own voice and find out how to say things your own way. So that's something that was applicable to journalism. But I think in many ways it applies to children's writing and to life in general, too. I've always sort of remembered that. It's different depending on the story that I've written. I love to hear about families that are cuddled up on the couch together, reading my picture books. One of my favorite things, I think, is hearing about a brand new reader, somebody who's just learning to read for themselves for the first time. And when your book is the first book that a kid reads all by himself or all by herself, that's pretty amazing. I mean, that's magic. I remember that moment when the light bulb went on for me. I was the youngest of 4 kids and everybody could read except me. So I spent the first years of my life chasing people around the house with books. Like, will you read to me? Will you read to me, please? And I remember when I started to figure it out, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be able to do this by myself. And so for me, that moment when the light bulb goes on, to have your book be the book where the light bulb goes on and a kid figures that out, that's probably the most memorable thing. My least favorite rule to follow: no ice cream before dinner. I have to admit, I was on my way home from a book signing last night and I stopped for ice cream, and on the way home that was dinner. So I'm still not good at following it all these years later. So Zeke is pretty close to my heart.